Here in the UK, we get an average of 159 days of rain a year, which means that us Brits are often having to light fires in wet conditions. It's been raining for the past 2 days, so this is a perfect opportunity for me to show you how to light a fire in soaking conditions, with nothing but my knife and a Firesteel. No lighters, no matches, no barbecue firelighters, just these 2 items. My first priority is to find natural tinder, i.e. something from nature that would likely combust into a flame when I scrape sparks on it from a Firesteel. The problem is, everything is soaking wet. This area I am in right now is so open, it's completely exposed to the rain. There's a small game trail running off to my left, and if I duck in here amongst the dense pine trees, the ground is considerably drier. It's still wet, but there is a better chance of finding drier wood in here. Pine trees are packed full of resin, a flammable substance which the trees secrete to protect itself against pests and rot when branches snap and break. To expose these resinous areas of wood, I look for dead branches that are well up off the ground. Here's one at head height, which I can just snap off with my hands. The resinous part is found right where the branch meets the main trunk of the tree. You'll know it's resin as it gives off a distinctive sweet aroma and it has a red tinge to it. But the branch is still covered in water, so I'll use my knife to take off the surface layer of the bark, revealing the dry inner bark and resin. Then I'll store this branch in the cargo pocket of my trousers to keep it dry. Now I have one method of firelighting in my pocket. Time to move on. As I get deeper into the woods, I notice this dead silver birch tree branch. Silver birch is easy to identify as the bark is often very pale white. I can gently prise away the bark with my knife and peel it away from the branch. The bark of the silver birch tree contains resinous oils which make it both highly water resistant, but it also contains betulin, which is highly flammable. And for the climate we typically have in Britain, I would argue this is the #1 natural firelighting resource that we have. The bark is one of the last parts of the silver birch tree to rot and decay, so even on this rotten branch here, the bark is perfectly usable and peels off really well. An important thing to note is that often when you peel the bark off a birch tree, parts of the rotten trunk can still often cling onto the bark. This will affect how efficient it will burn, so I tend to remove this inner bark to leave the thin outer layer for firelighting. But even in its current state, it's not going to light. But if I stick it in my pocket, then the warmth of my body heat will help to dry it out. In fact, in just 15 minutes, you can clearly see the fabric of my trouser pocket has wicked up the moisture from the birch bark. You can see this difference compared to my right hand pocket, which is bone dry. This particular area has recently been deforested. Trees that have either been blown down in a storm or cut like this can offer a great opportunity to collect dry tinder. Some of these larger trunks are from a western red cedar tree. A further walk down the forest track and I found where the logs were stacked. The outer bark on these logs is soaking wet, but the inside of the cedar tree can be peeled and fluffed up into a tinder bundle. This particular log here is leaning up against other logs, which results in the log underneath being kept out from the rain. This would be the best log to peel the bark from. I can scrunch the bark up into a ball and put this in my pocket. It's still raining pretty hard, but I thought I would head to this clearing to show you another tinder which you can gather if you happen to be in more open areas as opposed to dense forests. The grass in these forest clearings dies back each year, and even though it's summertime now, there are remnants of dead grass from last winter. The lighter, flatter pieces of dead grass are what I'm looking for. This can be buffed up into a tinder bundle like with the western red cedar bark. However, look at the difference in moisture from this bundle of grass here, which was picked from the open of the forest clearing. You can see the water drips from it as I squeeze it, compared to the grass picked just inside the edge of the forest, which when I squeeze it doesn't leak any water. Before I put this tinder bundle in my pocket, I'll buff it up first in my hands. The friction of rubbing it between my hands causes heat, which helps to draw out the moisture in the grass. Now I have gathered 3 different types of natural tinder. An hour or so later, the grass bundle in my pocket has dried a little, but even as I shower it with sparks from the Firesteel, it still struggles to light, where there is just too much moisture in it. I would need to leave this in my pocket for another few hours and keep buffing it up for it to then be dry enough to ignite. The same goes for the cedar bark. The bundle is much drier as a result of it being in my pocket, but it still takes a good amount of sparks to get it to ignite. It's still quite damp, and it won't take to flame quite so well as it would if it were a dry day. Nevertheless, both of these tinder options I would normally keep in my pocket, as if I were spending the night in the woods, these would most certainly work for firelighting the next day. I do still have the pine stick with the resin in it, and I could make some shavings from this, and they would catch a spark well. But now that I know there are silver birch trees around, these are by far the better firelighting resource. With that in mind, it's time to double down on the birch bark. Here's another fallen birch tree. This time, the bark is much more solid and intact. So I use my knife to slice a square shape into the bark, and then gently prise it back, being careful not to rip the bark. As I scout for a place to light the fire, I gather twigs on the way. This pine branch is ideal, as it's dead and off the ground, which means the branches break easily and have less moisture in them. I then look for the thinnest twigs I could possibly find, and it's important that they snap clean, and they don't hang on by the bark when they snap. If this is the case, then the twig is likely still too green, and it will smoke and smoulder instead of ignite. If it doesn't clean snap, it's going to be crap. I use the blade of my knife to scrape off tiny dust shavings from the outer white part of the silver birch bark. It takes a little time, but as I only have my knife and a Firesteel on me, no lighters or matches, I need to get this right and do a proper job. The larger you make the dust pile, the longer the flame will burn. I then cut off a piece of the birch bark and peel it into strips. The next process is not something I would normally do on a dry day, but on wet rainy days this can make a big difference to lighting a fire successfully from tree bark. I lay the outer white side of the strips over the blade of my knife and gently put my thumb over the top of it. I'm not applying too much pressure, otherwise the knife would cut me. Then I just pull the bark back from the blade of the knife, and it removes the dirt and tough outer layer of the bark, as well as making it into a thin curl. These curls are now super thin, and have the dry, damp outer layer removed. Now I can get the rest of the bark I peeled earlier in the day out of my pocket, as I will add this to extend the flame when I light the fire. Then I just put some sparks into the dust pile using the Firesteel. It ignites, but then it extinguishes quite quickly, as there is a fairly strong breeze coming through this woodland. This is the reality of wet weather firelighting with natural materials. It often doesn't work first time. In fact, it took a minute or so and a good amount of sparks before the flame finally ignited, and I was able to extend it using some of the fine bark curls I had made earlier. If I put any twigs straight on the fire now, it would likely extinguish it as the twigs are all wet. So I build up the flame using the remaining pieces of birch bark. Once the flame is well established, I will add the tiny twigs, but I will hold a horizontal stick underneath these just so that I can raise them and lower them to allow airflow to get into the fire and not smother it straight away. I throw on a few extra pieces of birch bark on top of these, as they will burn for a while. You can see at the moment the fire is smoking a lot, which means it's not yet ready for the next layer of wood. Once that flame creeps through the first layer of twigs, the smoke will begin to clear, like this. And then I will add the next layer of thicker twigs. Again, it will start to smoke whilst the moisture in the wood is being evaporated, but all I do is raise the stick up, which lifts the twig bundle and allows more air to get into the fire, which will make it burn hotter. Now that the flame is established, I can let go of the stick and just keep adding sticks and building it up. The fire is now lit. You might have noticed that I've made this fire a little close to these trees, which is not ideal, but I am only demonstrating the actual lighting technique of the fire, and I let it go out soon after this clip. And that is how I light a fire under wet conditions using only my knife, Firesteel, and the natural resources found around me. Cheers for watching the video, subscribe if you enjoyed it, and you can watch more bushcraft tips in my playlist, which is in the video description box below.